The first time my heart felt uneasy was when my daughter smiled at me and said, "You can hold the baby tomorrow. She's sleeping now." Her voice sounded gentle, polite, almost loving, and if that had been the end of it, I would have believed her. But just minutes later, as I stood quietly in the hallway outside her hospital room, I watched her carefully lift my newborn granddaughter from the bassinet and place her into the arms of a woman I had never seen before. A stranger. My hands went cold. My breath disappeared from my chest, and something deep inside me whispered that whatever my daughter was hiding, it was not small. I did not speak. I did not move. I only watched as the woman adjusted the blanket around my granddaughter, nodded once to my daughter, and slipped out the side door. My daughter never looked toward the hallway. That was the moment something inside me broke. If stories about family, hidden pain, and quiet courage touch your heart, I invite you to like and subscribe right now. These stories are shared so no one feels alone in moments like these. And now, coming back to story, I was 68 years old when my daughter gave birth to her first child. I had imagined that day for years. I imagined holding that little life in my arms, seeing my daughter's face reflected in tiny eyes, feeling that circle of love continue. I brought flowers, yellow ones, my daughter's favorite, since she was a little girl. The baby was born late at night. I was told to wait in the hallway. Nurses passed in quiet steps. Machines hummed softly behind the walls. I sat with my purse on my lap and my heart in my throat, watching the clock like it controlled my future. When they finally let me enter, my daughter looked tired, pale, not glowing, not joyful the way I had dreamed. I stepped toward the bassinet instinctively, my arms already aching to hold that tiny weight. She stepped in front of me. "She's sleeping," she said softly. "You can hold her tomorrow." Her smile reached her lips, but not her eyes. I felt disappointment. Of course, any grandmother would. But I also felt something else, a quiet discomfort I could not explain. I kissed her forehead, told her I understood, placed the flowers by the bed, and left without argument. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I returned early. The hospital was quiet, too quiet. Visiting hours weren't supposed to start for another 30 minutes, but I walked the hallway anyway. I told myself I just wanted to peek through the window, just to see her breathing. As I approached the room, I heard whispering, my daughter's voice, and another woman's voice. I slowed my steps, and then I saw it, my daughter gently lifting my granddaughter from the bassinet, not handing her to a nurse, not rocking her herself, but placing her into the arms of a woman I had never seen in my life. The woman wore a gray coat. Her hair was tucked under a scarf. She held my granddaughter with confidence, not with careful hesitation, with certainty. My daughter turned her back to the door as she helped adjust the blanket. I stood frozen in the hallway, unseen, and I understood something in that moment that made my knees weaken. Whatever was happening, it was not meant for me to see. I stepped back quietly. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure it could be heard through the walls. I didn't confront her. I didn't cry out. I didn't rush in. I walked back to the waiting area and sat down like nothing had happened. That was my mistake, because silence gave the secret time to grow. And secrets, when they grow, become dangerous. I sat in the waiting room that day pretending to read an old magazine I had already finished twice. My hands trembled so badly I had to fold them in my lap. My eyes kept drifting back toward the hallway where I had seen that woman disappear with my granddaughter in her arms. I told myself I was mistaken. I told myself she had been a nurse out of uniform. I told myself I was tired, but deep down I knew better. After a while, my daughter came out alone. Her face looked calm, too calm. She smiled and asked if I wanted some coffee. I said yes, even though my throat felt like it was closing. We sat together at a small table near the vending machines. She talked about how difficult labor had been, about how exhausted she felt, about how hard it was to sleep even when the baby slept. I watched her lips move, but my mind was somewhere else. I wanted to ask her where the baby had gone, but fear stopped me. Fear of being wrong, fear of being told I imagined it, fear of the answer. Later that afternoon, when visiting hours finally opened fully, I asked again if I could hold my granddaughter. Tomorrow, she said quickly. She's had a long day. I nodded, but trust cracked that day. I went home feeling heavier than I had the night before. Sleep did not come easy. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw that gray coat, those careful hands, that quiet exchange. The next morning, I arrived even earlier. I stood outside the room and listened. No voices, no whispers, just the steady hum of machines. I stepped inside, slowly. The bassinet was empty. My heart dropped straight through my body. I turned to my daughter. Where is she? She didn't look at me right away. She adjusted her blanket, took a sip of water. Then she said they took her for routine checks. How long? I asked. A little while. My stomach tightened. Hours passed. No baby returned. I asked nurses. They told me she had already been discharged earlier that morning. Discharged without me knowing, without me holding my granddaughter even once. I rushed back to my daughter's room. She was sitting up straighter now. Her bag was packed. Her eyes were dry. They said she went home earlier. I said carefully, with who? My daughter finally met my eyes. With her father, she said, but something inside me knew that was another lie. I drove home that day with a tight grip on the steering wheel, trying to steady myself. I told myself it was none of my business, that parents do what they think is best, that I was still adjusting emotionally. But later that evening, while taking out the trash, I noticed something strange. My daughter's porch light was off. Her car was gone, and the house was dark. No, baby cried inside. I told myself they were visiting relatives, but my heart did not believe that. Days passed. No phone calls, no visits, no pictures. I left messages that went unanswered. Then one afternoon, 3 days later, my daughter finally called. She sounded tired, distant. I asked about the baby. There was a pause. She's fine, she said. The way she said it made my chest ache. Can I see her? I asked. Another pause. Not right now. That night, I could not sit still. I opened old photo albums. I stared at pictures of my daughter as a baby. I remembered the way I used to rock her when she cried, the way I promised her she would always be safe. Somewhere inside that memory, a terrible thought began to grow. What if she had given her baby away? I pushed the thought away at first. No mother would do that without telling her own mother. No daughter would hide something like that. And yet, the next morning, I drove to her house without calling. The door was locked. The curtains were drawn. The mailbox was full. And then I saw the moving truck parked 2 houses down the street. My daughter and her husband were standing beside it, boxes stacked high, strangers carrying their things. They were leaving without a word to me. I pulled my car into the driveway and stepped out slowly. My legs felt weak. My heart pounded like it wanted to escape my chest. My daughter turned and saw me. Her face went white. "What's going on?" I asked. She forced a smile. "We're just making a change." "Where is my granddaughter?" I asked. Her husband looked away. My daughter swallowed hard. "She's safe." That word again. Safe. It echoed like a warning. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table and cried the way only a grandmother can cry when her heart feels like it has been torn in half without warning. And that is when I made the decision that would change everything. If my daughter would not tell me the truth, I would find it myself. The next morning, I woke up with a strange calm inside me. Not peace, not relief, just a cold, steady quiet, the kind that comes right before a storm. I made myself a cup of coffee I barely touched and sat at the kitchen table staring at the wall where my daughter's childhood photos used to hang before she took them down during her last visit. That was when I realized something that made my throat tighten. She had been preparing to leave long before the baby was born. I took my purse and drove back to the hospital. I told myself I was only going to ask a few harmless questions, just enough to ease my mind. I walked up to the front desk and said I was the baby's grandmother and wanted to check on a follow-up appointment. The young woman at the desk clicked on her computer and frowned slightly. "There is no follow-up appointment listed," she said. My heart skipped. "That can't be right," I said gently. "She was only discharged a few days ago." The woman typed again. Her smile faded. She leaned closer to the screen. "This discharge didn't go through the normal process," she said slowly. Something in her voice told me this was not routine. She excused herself and stepped into a back room. I sat in the waiting chair, feeling every heartbeat in my ears. When she returned, a man in a white coat followed her. He introduced himself quietly and asked me to step into a private office. As soon as the door closed, my hands began to shake. "What is going on with my granddaughter?" I asked. He hesitated before answering, and that hesitation told me everything. There was an emergency transfer request, he said carefully, signed by both parents. "Transfer where?" I asked. He shifted in his chair. "To a private facility." "What kind of facility?" My voice cracked. "A long-term infant placement center." He said, The words felt unreal. Why? I whispered. He removed his glasses and looked down. Medical concerns. My head spun. What concerns? He hesitated again, then quietly said, "Your granddaughter was born with complications." My chest felt like it folded in on itself. In all my waiting, all my visits, all my whispered questions, not one single person had told me my grandchild was sick. What kind of complications? I asked. He lowered his voice. Severe respiratory distress. Heart irregularities. The parents requested immediate specialized placement. They never told me. I said, "I understand." He replied softly. I left the hospital numb. Driving felt automatic. Breathing felt optional. My daughter had hidden her child's illness from me, hidden the transfer, hidden the goodbye, hidden everything. That night, I sat in the dark and realized the baby I never got to hold might have been taken because her parents couldn't handle the weight of her condition. They didn't give her away because they didn't love her. They gave her away because they were afraid. The next days were the hardest I've ever lived. I called my daughter again and again. No answer. I drove to the address the hospital had on file for the transfer facility. It wasn't a building. It was a gated property. No sign, no public entrance, just tall fencing and a heavy metal gate. I sat in my car across the street for hours. Finally, a woman arrived and unlocked the gate. She wore medical scrubs and carried folders under her arm. I got out of my car and approached her slowly. "I'm the baby's grandmother." I said, "Please just tell me if she's okay." The woman looked at my face for a long moment. She saw my age, my hands, my fear. "She's alive," she said quietly. That was all I needed to hear. I begged to see her. She told me I wasn't authorized. She told me only the parents were listed for visitation. I told her the parents had disappeared. I told her I hadn't been allowed to hold my grandchild even once. Her eyes softened. "I can't let you in," she said, "but she's being well cared for." I drove home that day with both relief and new pain wrapped together inside me. 2 weeks passed. Then a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a single folded piece of paper. It read, "She was only meant to be temporary. You weren't supposed to know this soon." My hands shook so badly, I dropped the letter. Temporary. My granddaughter was never supposed to stay. That night, my daughter finally called. She was crying. She told me everything. The illness, the fear, the pressure from her husband's family, the promises of people who said they would find the baby a better future. She told me she was leaving town. She told me she didn't think she could face me. And that was when I said the words that changed the course of this story forever. "You don't get to disappear from this." I told her, and neither does my granddaughter. After that phone call, I did not sleep. I sat in my living room all night with the lamp on, holding the phone in my lap as if it might suddenly ring again. My daughter's voice had cracked when she spoke to me. I heard fear in it, real fear, the kind that isn't about being judged, but about losing control. By morning, I had made my decision. If my granddaughter was still alive, then she still had a grandmother who wasn't going to walk away. I called a lawyer. I told him everything. From the night I watched my baby being handed to a stranger, to the secret hospital transfer, to the letter with no return address. He listened quietly. When I finished, he rested his hands on the desk and said one sentence that sent a chill through me. "This sounds like unlawful adoption." Those words landed like thunder. He told me that if even one signature was obtained under pressure, fear, or false pretenses, the entire process could be challenged. He told me that babies had been moved this way before, through quiet deals, quiet money, quiet promises. Families too scared or too ashamed to fight back. But I wasn't too scared, and I wasn't going to be ashamed of loving my grandchild. Within 48 hours, he filed an emergency petition. Within 72 hours, the facility was required to halt the adoption process. And within 1 week, my daughter was forced to appear in court. The day of the hearing, I sat on one side of the courtroom, my lawyer beside me, my hands folded so tight they ached. Across the room sat my daughter. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her husband stayed beside her at first, but when the judge began asking direct questions, he slowly leaned back, creating space between them. That space grew wider with every question. The judge asked why the grandmother had not been notified. My daughter's lips trembled. The judge asked why the baby's medical condition had not been disclosed to extended family. Her husband stared at the floor. Then the judge asked the question that split the room open. "Who introduced you to the placement organization?" Silence. My daughter glanced at her husband. He inhaled sharply. Then he spoke. "My mother." Everything suddenly made sense. The strange phone calls, the whispered conversations, the way decisions had already been made before my daughter even spoke to me. This wasn't just fear. This was pressure. This was control. His family had decided my granddaughter was a burden before she ever took a full breath. The judge ordered a private evaluation of the adoption contract. By the next week, the truth was undeniable. The signatures had been rushed. The medical prognosis had been exaggerated. The facility had financial ties to the placement agency. And the birth mother, my daughter, had never been fully informed of her rights. The adoption was suspended instantly. The facility was placed under investigation, and my granddaughter was finally brought back under legal protection. The first time I saw her, it was in a medical room filled with soft beeping sounds and warm yellow light. A nurse placed her gently in my arms. She was smaller than I imagined. Her breathing was faint but steady. And when her tiny fingers curled around mine, something ancient and fierce awakened inside me. That moment healed something I didn't know had been broken for decades. My daughter stood in the doorway, watching me hold her child. She was crying, not loud, not dramatic, just steady tears falling silently. When she finally stepped forward, her knees nearly gave out. She rested her head on my shoulder like she used to when she was little. I didn't know how to fight them. She whispered, "But now you do," I said, "and you never have to fight alone again." The legal case dragged on for months. The facility lost its license. The agency shut down. Several families were reunited with children they had nearly lost without fully knowing why. But the hardest battle wasn't with the courtroom. It was inside my own family. My daughter and her husband separated. He moved back in with his parents. They blamed me. They blamed the judge. They blamed everyone except themselves. But my daughter stayed. She moved back into her old room, the same room where she once practiced dance routines and cried over school crushes and planned her future. Now, that future looked different. Hospital visits, medical equipment, uncertain outcomes. But my granddaughter was alive, and she was home. One evening, months later, I sat beside my daughter while we watched the baby sleep in her crib. I almost gave her away. My daughter said quietly. I answered without hesitation, "But you didn't." Life did not suddenly turn easy after that. I wish I could say it did. I wish I could say that once the truth came out, everything fell neatly back into place. It didn't. Healing is not neat. Love is not quick. And forgiveness does not arrive all at once. It comes in small steps, like learning how to breathe again after nearly drowning. My granddaughter stayed fragile for a long time. There were hospital visits that seemed never-ending, machines that blinked and hummed through the night, tiny medicines measured with trembling hands. Some nights, I sat beside her crib until dawn, afraid to sleep because I didn't want to miss a single breath she took. My daughter slept in the next room. Some nights, she didn't sleep at all. I would hear her pacing softly. Other nights, I would hear her crying into her pillow, trying not to let me hear. But I always heard. Guilt does not leave easily. One evening, as I was rocking the baby near the window, my daughter sat across from me on the bed. She watched us quietly for a long time. Then she said, "I was so afraid of ruining my life. I almost destroyed it." I didn't answer right away. I let the silence hold us. Then I said, "Fear makes us believe lies. Love teaches us what's real." Tears rolled down her face. "Do you forgive me?" That question sat between us like a fragile glass ornament. One careless word could shatter it. I stood slowly and walked to her. I placed the baby gently into the crib. Then I sat beside my daughter and took her shaking hands in mine. "I never stopped loving you," I said, "and because I never stopped loving you, forgiveness was never the hard part." She collapsed into my arms and sobbed like the little girl she once was. And for the first time since that awful day at the hospital, I felt our family begin to stitch itself back together. Months passed, then years. My granddaughter grew stronger in ways the doctors once doubted. She learned to smile, then to laugh, then to reach, then to stand. Every small milestone felt like a miracle stitched into ordinary life. My daughter became different, too, softer, stronger, more awake. She went back to school part-time. She learned medical caregiving skills so she could care for her daughter without fear. Every scar inside her became a place where wisdom settled. One afternoon, years later, we were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. My granddaughter was playing with wooden blocks at our feet. My daughter said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't followed me that night?" I looked at my granddaughter, at the way she squinted in concentration, as she stacked each block carefully, at how she clapped when they finally stood tall. "Yes," I said, "I think about it every day." My daughter swallowed. "You saved her." I shook my head slowly. "No, I loved her. And sometimes love does the saving on its own." Time moved forward the way it always does, quietly and without waiting for anyone's heartbreak to finish healing. My daughter later reconciled with her husband, not because of pressure, but because he finally chose humility. He apologized with a broken voice and trembling hands. He admitted what his family had done. He admitted what he had allowed. Forgiveness did not come quickly there, but it did come. Our family learned a new way to live, carefully, honestly, together. And my granddaughter grew into a bright, curious little soul who loved music and colored outside every line. She laughed loudly. She loved fiercely. And every night before bed, she reached out for my hand and said, "Night, night, Grandma." Those 2 words healed more than any courtroom ever could. Years later, on a quiet evening, my daughter sat beside me again. Her voice was steady this time, free of fear. "Thank you for not giving up on me," she said. I smiled. A mother never truly lets go. She just learns how to stand behind quietly when it's time for her child to stand on her own. If there's one thing I learned from all of this, it is this: love does not always arrive gently. Sometimes it storms through your life in ways that terrify you. Sometimes it forces you to run after faith when fear tells you to turn back. And sometimes it asks you to forgive things you never imagined you could survive. But love is worth all of it. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone you love, or someone who once loved you through your darkest moment, then please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe so you can continue walking these stories with us. Because sometimes a story doesn't just entertain us, it heals us.